trouble, hung out with the wrong crowds, found myself locked up in a youth detention center. And that's really when, I first started feeling like God was calling me in my heart. Got plugged into a church, got saved, and then fast forwarding a few years, got into the workplace, started working in manufacturing, mostly aerospace. And I worked in aerospace for over 20 years. Worked my way through school, got a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University, a master's degree from Indiana University. I am a certified Six Sigma Black Belt from Six Sigma Global Institute, and I have a lean practitioner certification from the University of Kentucky in partnership with Toyota. And so most of my career has been focused on continuous improvement, lean, and Six Sigma. And as I've done transformations for some pretty big companies, companies like Boeing, United Technologies, Train, Goodrich, really it's given me a passion for leadership. And so recently I became a John Maxwell certified team member, where I'm a speaker trainer coach. And I started my own company called Forge Point LLC. You could find it at forgepointllc.net. And really, Forge Point is my umbrella company where I do my speaking, training, and coaching, but I also publish books. One of my books is called Everyday Lean, available on Amazon as well as Barnes and Nobles. And then I also have a podcast, all under the umbrella of thank you. All under the umbrella of Forge Point, and the podcast is called Walk Talk Faith in Motion. And it's just me and my brother, just talking about our faith and our walk with God, just as two, ordinary guys who are fathers and husbands and, workers out in the workplace, just navigating this life and this world while trying to, live a life that honors God. So that's what we talk about in the podcast. And that's what my company, Forge Point, is all about.
Thank you for sharing that. So, I guess my first question to you is you have a lot going on, right? Very busy, and I love the work ethic. How do you stay emotionally balanced or emotionally harmonized with everything that you're doing in your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a really good question. Luckily, I'm in a position where I work for myself right now, and I do most of my work from home, so I definitely have a better work-life balance than I might have had for most of my career. So that definitely helps. But the thing about it is, I find that you know I don't. I mean, how do I say this? I try to get in the word every day, and I try to spend some time in prayer every day. And I don't beat myself up about it if I don't do it. It's not like it's a discipline that I really try to adhere to. It's a rest that I get the privilege of doing. And when I find that I'm able to actually do it, it definitely helps with my mental health and just my own, the way I handle my work-life balance. And then the other part of it is getting in the gym. I'm a real believer in trying to do the best to take care of myself. I've been on a transformation journey physically for a few years now. I've lost about 120 pounds while gaining about 30 pounds of muscle. And so I try to work out every day. And I would say between the prayer, and spending the time in the word every day, doing some sort of devotion, and then getting, some time to just work out and do something physical, those two things really kind of help me to have the energy and the emotional energy as well as the physical energy to do everything that I'm working on right now.
I've always shared with people one of the ways that I did that was similar to you, that I want to be in harmony with the four pillars of health: spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental health, right?
Mm,
And one of the ways that I did that is, and we're going to get into it, is that I started to reduce waste,
mm,
right? Let's say waste of food, waste in
mm-hmm,
the type of food, the type of people, they're wasting my energy and my resources.
right.
And I began to understand that that was keeping me very in harmony and very balanced, but also the strong foundation of faith. And
Mm-hmm.
going to the gym. Who doesn't love the gym, right? I love the gym. So
Especially days like today where you could get in the sauna after a good workout, before you go and freeze in the weather.
I miss the sauna. You know what? If Randall, if I was rich, I would have a jacuzzi and a sauna in my house.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. They are becoming more and more affordable, but to me, it's more of the cost of operating it than just installing it that scares me away.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? Like you need money to do some of these things.
Right.
When it comes to everyday lean and when it comes to waste, explain that a little bit to us from the perspective of how it impacts our lives.
Yeah, so for the listeners who maybe are not super familiar with the concept of lean, lean is a topic. It is a tool that's usually found in manufacturing environments first and foremost. It was popularized by Toyota decades ago, and it's made it to the U.S. So that's funny because it actually started in the U.S., but none of the U.S. manufacturers really wanted any part of it. Then Toyota became super successful deploying lean, and then it made its way to the US out of necessity because companies wanted to be more competitive. And so they had to start looking for waste to remove from their processes. And what I would say is, lean is all about removing waste. That's what what it's about at the end of the day. And so whether we're talking about building an F-15 or we're talking about, processing tax returns or, anything in between, it could be baking a cake. Anything that is a process is going to have waste in it. And so, what I mean by waste, I'm not talking about trash or rubbish or leftovers necessarily. I'm talking about 8 different things that show up in all processes. And I use the acronym downtime to remember what those 8 wastes are. And the acronym downtime stands for defects, overproduction, waiting, non utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and extra processing. And those 8 things show up in pretty much any type of process you could think of. For example, if you're baking a cake, something very simple, if you go through all the work of gathering your ingredients, right? You mix the batter, you got it ready to go, you put it in a pan, and you're ready to put it in the oven, but you forgot to turn on the oven and preheat it. Now, what are you doing? You're waiting, right? You're going to have to wait for that oven to preheat. Where if you make the very simple adjustment that most people do just out of, intuition, starting the oven and preheating it beforehand, you eliminate that waste of waiting. It's the same thing with every process, and it's something that we naturally do in our everyday lives without even thinking about it. So in my book, Everyday Lean, what I attempt to do is one, break it down and make it very simple and applicable for people because there's tons of lean books out there. Most of them are written by people much smarter than me with engineering degrees. And honestly, they could sound kind of complicated and a little bit intimidating. So my approach was, hey, if I was talking to myself 20 years ago when I was a machinist on the shop floor, how would I explain it? If I was talking to a mom who was grocery shopping who had never heard of the concept, how would I explain it? And what tools would I focus on sharing about that I think would be most helpful universally across the board in everyday life and in any job, in any role, regardless of whether it's tied to manufacturing or some other business process or whatever.
I like that explanation because if I look at my own life, I can see where that would fit in. Um, Especially when I want to make sure that I can grow into the type of person that I would want to become. What do you think are some of the obstacles that are preventing people from identifying what they have to do and going through with it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen is a lot of times people just can't seem to find the time to do the things that they really want to do. I've been in that situation myself a lot. Writing a book was something I've been wanting to do for years. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who know exactly what I'm talking about. Either they are still in that place, or maybe they actually have written a book and they know what it's like to have it kind of in the back of their mind for a long time. But it's really hard to find the time. Maybe it's people who are trying to get into the gym for the first time and they're again trying to find the time. When do I go to the gym? If you think about transformation, it's all about taking the first steps. What are those first steps? Really smart people like Jordan Peterson, for example, if anyone's familiar with him, would tell you like take the very smallest step possible first. Don't make it too big. The smallest step might be just like driving to the gym and walking around for 5 minutes and leaving, right? And then you build that into a habit and you build on, you keep adding more and more to it, right? So, if you're able to eliminate waste out of your everyday life, you should be able to find more time, get more time back in your day. So you could start to do some of the things that you haven't been able to prioritize in the past due to a lack of time. So that's kind of one example, right? There are other tools as well. Like another one that comes to mind is like 5S. 5S is really all about cleaning your room. It stands for sort, straighten, shine, standardize, and sustain. So it's all about, hey, let's get rid of the stuff we don't need, get rid of the clutter, and then whatever's left, let's make sure like we have a place for everything, things are organized, it's neat, we know where to find it, and then we have some sort of method of standardizing and holding ourselves accountable, right? So think about it like cleaning your room. Like you get rid of all the trash first and everything that's left. You make sure you got a dedicated spot for it. Those kind of things free up mental energy, and they help people to feel less anxious and more relaxed so that they can do things that they have been putting on the back burner. Instead of, sitting on the couch and scrolling for 30 minutes just to relieve stress, you might not feel as much stress now because you've implemented some of these simple tools, and you have, freed up some mental capacity in your life to where you could use it for some of the things that you maybe been holding off on and get those first steps of transformation started.
Scrolling is such a distraction, isn't it?
Absolutely. It absolutely is. And I think for a lot of people, it's a problem. It's something that you have to like really guard against.
When I had Instagram years ago, there's a section where you can say your average watch time, right? On the app. At one point, I was reaching almost 5 hours a day
Wow.
on Instagram. That is a part-time job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I look back on that, I was like, Train, what did you gain?
Hmm.
I no longer have the app for those wondering, right? And I shared that because you don't realize how much time you're wasting until you track it. It's like
Yeah.
macros, it's like calories, it's like time, it's like money. These are big things that if you don't pay attention to it and you do it in a passive way, you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, did I miss dinner
Yeah,
doing
well,
this?
and I'm glad you mentioned tracking it, because one of the things I talk about in my book as well, and this is a basic lean principle that I've used in various different transformations, is, using data to define our problems in terms of a gap. So, for example, if one of your problems is, I can't seem to find an hour a day to go to the gym. Let's just say, for example, when you start tracking things like that and you find that, well, I'm spending 5 hours a day on Instagram, now I have a good starting point to figure out where to find this other hour that was a gap and maybe close that gap, right? And you could use the same concept with like your budget. If you're noticing that, you want to spend, I don't know, you want to save $500 a month, but at the end of the day you're doing a zero base budget and you only have $200 extra. Where do you get the other 300? I would say that's a $300 gap, and we would define our problem in terms of a gap. We're going to use whatever data we have to, look at it and define our problems in the terms of a gap. And then we look using basic, again, lean continuous improvement methodologies that I talk about in my book, like root cause analysis, for example. We would look at what is the root cause. Well, maybe I'm spending an extra $300 a month on, restaurants or subscriptions, or, you name it, that I could start to do some, root cause analysis to figure out what do I need to eliminate from my budget to get that gap from, $300 down to $0, right? I was only saving two, now I'm saving five because I closed that gap of $300, right? So it's very important that, we have some data, and the more data we have, the more information we could get from it to figure out what our real problems are, frame them in the form of a gap, and then figure out, what are we going to do about it? What action do we want to take to close that gap and solve some of these little problems that we have in our life?
What kind of benefits would that let me rephrase that. What kind of benefits would that have on someone's, let's say, mental and emotional health when it comes to identifying and then reducing those gaps?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you'd have all sorts of benefits. I mean, a lot of times, people don't take those first steps. Either time is usually the number one reason, but the second reason is they just don't know where to start. So having that information, having that data, will at least give them the information that they need so they know where to begin, right? So they know what to focus on. So now we could, roll out one of those excuses, one of those reasons why people are not, able to get started in whatever they're trying to accomplish. And that will definitely, give you more energy and motivation and less stress and anxiety because now you actually know what to do. I mean, the worst thing is to have a problem and not even know where it's coming from or what to do about it. And that's unfortunately that's been the situation with a lot of teams and a lot of businesses that I've worked with is they know that their cost of rework, for example, they're having to do a lot of rework. It's through the roof, but they don't have good data to really know why they have so much rework. Once we start to collect the data and we actually could identify, the and pinpoint the problem, that's like half the battle right there. Like half the battle is already won just by knowing where we need to focus.
Yeah, there's so many people who don't know that there's a problem because either one, they're ignoring it, two, they don't know how to identify it, or
Mm-hmm.
the third, which I think is always the most painful, is that they know there's a problem, but they bury it.
Yeah, yeah, that happens a lot too. I mean, I think it's part of just human nature, right? Like we start to think that it'll go away if we just ignore it for long enough, right? We think that, somehow it's going to just, magically just disappear. And that's usually not what happens. And most stress in life is caused not because we have too much to do, but because we're not doing the things that we should be doing. Because we're either trying to bury it or we're procrastinating or, what have you. We're not prioritizing the right things. That's really where most of our stress comes from is knowing we have that in the back of our mind just kind of eating away at us when we're trying to rest or relax and we can't fully do that because we know that we have this thing that we have to do. I know I've been there a lot personally where I might want to just go veg out and watch a movie or play video games for an hour or something like that and just rest, but in the back of my mind I know I got to do this thing, so I try as much as possible to do all those things first before I go and I try to rest and relax. That way I could really, enjoy that time.
Some days just getting out of bed is half the battle.
100%. Yeah. Some days that is half the battle. And sleep is a very important thing that we all need. And that's something that we should definitely prioritize as well. But yeah, sometimes it takes a lot just to be motivated enough to just crawl out of bed. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Like I look back on some of the people that have come in and out of my life and some of them who've suffered like health concerns and health issues. There's a lack of sleep, a lack of taking the time to pour into themselves. They would give and give and give, let's say to a job, let's say to
Hmm.
other things that truly didn't bring them the joy that they think it did, but it was, to your earlier point in our conversation, it was just waste. It was just
Yeah.
I am subscribing to all these things, toxic people, bad relationships, chaotic jobs. And then you ask them, take a moment to understand, what are you doing for you? How are you getting everyday lean? To your point, do
Hmm.
you see people neglecting themselves when it comes to, from a perspective of reducing the waste in their own lives, in their own behaviors?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's especially for anyone who's a parent, right? It's like it's hard to take time away for yourself to, take care of yourself, whether it's to grow yourself and develop yourself or to go and exercise or get those hours of sleep that you actually do need. It's very hard when you're working and you have a family and you feel like there's a need to sacrifice yourself and you may even feel selfish or guilty when you do take that time. But it's essential because, for you to fully show up for other people, you have to take care of yourself, right? I mean, as a Christian, I cannot pour out onto others what the Spirit has not poured out onto me first, right? If I'm dry, if my cup is empty, then I don't have anything to share with anyone else. It starts at my heart first before I could go and talk to anyone else. I mean, the Bible's very clear not to point out the speck in your brother's eye till you remove the plank from your own. And that applies in numerous different ways. It applies to just how you take care of yourself mentally and physically and spiritually and emotionally as well. If you're not taking care of yourself in those various different regards, how can you possibly, be there for anyone else? So we have to, use the basic tools. We have to identify where the waste is in our life, use the basic tools to get rid of as much of it as we can, and then start taking steps. The smaller the steps the better. Establish those habits, whether it's getting more sleep to start off with, which I would say is probably the number one thing a person could do to improve all those different aspects of life, right? I'll be honest, I'm the type of person that if I have a rough night's sleep and I don't sleep at least like 5 or 6 hours, I'm not even going to go to the gym because I feel like it's pointless because I didn't rest my body enough, you know what I mean, to like really get a good benefit out of it. But yeah, I mean, whatever it is a person's trying to do, it starts with getting some waste out of their life to get some time back, to balance themselves, and then they can really start to focus on taking those little steps and building that momentum.
What role does your faith play in your progress in life and building that strong foundation?
Yeah, I mean, my faith is everything, man. It is the foundation of who I am. So, I got saved and became a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, when I was 15 years old. And, from there, I've just grown and matured in my walk with Christ ever since. And I would say that, when it comes to growth, I think a lot of people have a misconception that growth is something that just happens with time, and it absolutely doesn't. I mean, everyone's heard you could have, 1 year of experience repeated 10 times versus 10 years of experience. Well, it's the same thing with faith. If you're not, making a conscious decision to grow and develop, um, then you're going to stay stagnant. And so there's definitely been periods of my life where I feel like I was stagnant and I wasn't growing because I wasn't intentional about it. And there was other times where, I absolutely was more intentional and focused more on growing. And what that looks like to me is, you know, um, learning more about how much God loves me and experiencing his love and then loving him more in return. And I think mostly that shows up in, interactions with other people. I think that one of the main ways we love God is in the way we love others. And I think that, like, for me, when I say, growing in my faith, those are the things that I'm referring to, really understanding fully, what Christ has done for me and the love that God is showing me every day. And, on the other side, expressing my love more and more by being, more patient. Usually that's how it shows up for me, is the patience, because I'm not a patient person by nature. So but yeah, so that's kind of been my experience. And it's the foundation of everything I do. I mean, I think for a person to really be a good leader, I'm a Maxwell Leadership Certified team member. I think if you really want to be a good leader, you have to look to the Bible and at the examples of the great leaders that are in the Bible. I mean, Jesus Christ himself, some people would call him a level 5 leader. I mean, he's a guy who has followers 2,000 years after he walked this earth, for a reason, right? And I think that what a lot of people who are in management roles or leadership roles miss, is that, one of the best ways to lead people is by showing them how much you care about them. And I think that's why Jesus was such a great leader, is because it was obvious that even when he was upset and flipping tables in the temple, people knew that he cared. Like, he cared about them as people. And that's something that really, great leaders exhibit, is they care for the people that work with them, for example. And so what I've seen in my career is that when leadership is lacking, or we don't have the right leadership development going on, or we just don't have the right focus on leadership, then any type of transformation that we might try to implement is either not going to be as impactful, or it's not going to last. We may get it implemented, we may implement lean tools, we may implement culture changes, but they don't last if you don't first focus on building that foundation and creating that culture where you have the right type of leadership. Leaders have to be focused more on others than they are on themselves and trying to climb the ladder. They got to be more focused on supporting their teams and enabling people to improve the work that they're doing than trying to, have the right, stats for the quarter and things like that.
Is that what's missing in the world from your perspective? Is that the love, not only for yourself, but for others when it comes to transformations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think that is something that is lacking in a lot of cases. Yeah, I mean, that love has to be embedded in there, and it has to be real, and it has to be organic. And I mean, that's something, I'm full transparency. I know that there's been lots of times where I didn't show up that way, and that's something that God has been, revealing to me as I've been learning more and more about leadership throughout my life and transformation throughout my life. I've seen different areas where I could have showed up better and would have gotten better results. And, all we could do is, learn from those experiences and try to do better overall. But if you think about like, the state of our world and our leaders across nations, right? How much time do we spend in our governments, for example, really developing the leaders? Like, I don't know that we really do. Like those people who become elected, yeah, they get elected, and then what? We should continue to grow and develop them. That should be intentional as part of what we're doing, and not only developing them as leaders, but also teaching them, in my opinion, some of the basic lean tools that are used to solve problems, because we got so many problems and so many different solutions out there, and people have various different opinions, and usually there's political agendas behind those opinions. But really, there's some basic tools that we use in industry that take away opinions and take away political views and gets us right to the root cause of things in an unbiased way that everyone could agree to. But we don't see those really employed, in a lot of areas where it can make a big impact.
One of my biggest concerns from for the world, outside looking in different countries, but on the global scale, is I think we've come so far from the rule that do unto others as you would want do unto you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much humanity in that. And the reason why I say that is if you saw something being done to someone else and you ignore it, you're pro for it, whatever the case is, however your stance is, and if you ask yourself what you see being done to someone else, would you want that done to yourself or to your family? If the answer is no, then you should be compelled internally. Now, I'm not talking about someone else should. You should
Mm-hmm.
feel a sense of duty to say that, okay, maybe I need to stand against this. And it goes back to what we are talking about the love, right? There was a time where this is probably long ago, it used to be all community based where you were protective of your community, right? It didn't
Right.
matter what you look for. It was we are all one. It's not races of people, it's just a human race, for example, right? Or
Right.
it was just love for the common man or woman. So I'm glad that you touched on that because sometimes we can get lost into different items to divide us when we should be coming together. Do you see a lack of unity in the world today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a shared experience as you in that, I do feel like there was a time when, we were kind of trending in a good direction where there was more of this focus on the human race versus different races. And, I think that that's definitely a tactic of our enemy, the enemy of our faith, to divide us up in various different ways. I mean, the more where we could be divided by, race or gender or income level or, nation, whatever, the least likely we are to band together and support each other, and the more opportunity for the enemy to come in and attack us and tear us down. And so I've definitely seen over my lifetime, at least in my experience, this shift where it felt like we were kind of trending away from certain things, and now they've, right at the pinnacle of what I thought was like going to really be like a unifying moment, things kind of went the opposite way. And I think that, what has been encouraging, at least recently within the last year or so, is I have had this feeling that more and more people are, at least having conversations about their faith, and more people are turning to Christ, which I think, I mean, the scriptures tell us that there's neither, Jew or Greek, there's neither male or female, that we're all one in Christ Jesus. And so to me, like, that is the solution. Obviously, as a person who believes in Jesus, I'm going to think that's the solution. But I think even for people who maybe are not followers of Christ, they could probably still learn from that, right? And see the value in the fact that, like, we should just tear down those barriers. We should just be one human race and not come up with these different divisions. And I think what it comes down to is an often overlooked leadership trait. That's not just a leadership trait, but a trait that should be, that should be exhibited primarily in leaders, is empathy. I mean, we have to be able to empathize, with the people around us and the people who are not even like us. We have to be able to put ourselves in their situation and understand life from their perspective and their point of view. And like you said, treat others the way that we want to be treated. We all know that. We all believe that. If you ask most people, they would say that yes, they believe that. But a lot of times we lack the empathy in the moment to really live that and to really practice, what we actually believe. So from my perspective, I'm always the first to admit I'm a hypocrite because I know there's plenty of times in my life where I don't live up to my own standards and beliefs. But I think that's the starting point, right? You can't fix the problem if you don't admit that you have a problem in one way or shape or form. We're all hypocrites because even if it's just that one principle, we all would believe it. But again, having that empathy in the moment to actually live that way, that's usually a lot harder than it sounds for whatever reason. But yeah, again,
Yes.
encouraged by the faith I've been seeing recently.
Yes, yes. Talking and walking is definitely two different things, but it's all about the progression, not perfection, and that's what we want, right? Are we
Yep.
progressing in the right direction? When it comes
Yep.
to the lean now, um, from for someone, let's say, who's engaging, who's in work and they're working long hours because they're trying to build up their brand and their company, how can they apply that to what they're trying to create from a business perspective and ultimately how it shows up for their family?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is if you may or may not be familiar with this, but it's the big rocks analogy. If anyone is not familiar with it, I would say go to YouTube, type in big rocks, and you'll get a very good visual of what that looks like. Essentially, what the analogy shows that it shows a jar, and you have some different things you're trying to get in the jar. Some are big stones, some are small pebbles, and then there's sand. And if you put the sand in first and then you put the pebbles, you'll never get those big rocks in there. It just physically, you cannot make it work. But if you put the big rocks in first, and then you put the little pebbles in, and then you pour the sand in, the sand will kind of, filter through all the cracks and you get it all in this jar. First, it doesn't look like you could fit it all in, but then you actually do get it all in very easily. So, how does that apply to the question? Well, it starts by prioritization. We have to prioritize our life. We have to know what to focus on. We have to know what's important to us and what it is we're trying to accomplish. A lot of times, we don't even take the time to sit down and write down our goals and where we want to be at the end of the month, at the end of the week, at the end of the year, et cetera, much less 5 years or 10 years down the road. So it kind of starts with, knowing yourself, knowing who you are, knowing where your gaps are, knowing what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, your family's goals are, and then prioritizing those activities. Those would be the big rocks, making sure that they happen first and foremost, whether you have to schedule the time, block off the time. Maybe there's certain times of the day where you have to turn your phone into do not disturb mode because you're protecting those big rocks, right? And then you'll find that all those little things, all the little pebbles, the emails, the phone calls, all the little sand, like scrolling on, Instagram or what have you, they'll find their way in when you absolutely need to do it. But it starts with identifying what are those big rocks, what are those priorities, and making time for them first, which for me are things like, getting my sleep, getting plenty of rest, getting in the gym, right? Spending time with my family and my kids, like doing all those sort of things. Like if I are focusing on those things, those are some big rocks that, if I could do them first and foremost, I'll find the time to work. I'll find the time to answer emails. Those things will just kind of happen organically, but I got to block off the things that I know are most important and that are going to get me to where I want to be in, a few years. I'm starting my business. I'm pretty early in Forge, founding Forge Point, and there's certain activities that I absolutely prioritize when I'm going to networking events, when I'm doing podcasts to, talk to people about my book or about my show. I have actually two interns on my team that I meet with daily. Like those are the big rocks in my business that I have to absolutely prioritize, right? But all the little hundreds of little things that I need to do, they will, I'll find a time and place to do them. So I would say the first thing is prioritization. And a lot of that prioritization starts by just understanding who you are and what your goals are, which means you got to take some time to reflect and you probably got to write some things down. And then once you do that, the priority will kind of make itself clear.
Priorities, accountability, two things that doesn't get taught in school, but is definitely two things that are very important, especially as it pertains to helping you to achieve what you want to achieve. Like a lot of people have aspirations of a certain type of life. I want to
Yeah.
be this type of man. I want to be this type of woman with this
Yep.
lifestyle. And then the question goes, okay, what are you willing to do for it? I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
work hard. Okay, that's one aspect, but write it down. Like, what's your 30-day goal, your 60-day, your 90-day, your 1 year, 2 years? Where do you want to be? How are you going to measure it? And some people are like, whoa, 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 terrain. I just want to get up and go out there. I'm like,
Right.
it's a little bit more than that, right? Do you think some people get confused and they try to simplify it because they know that it's a grand task to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes some time and it takes some, contemplation, which is not something everyone is comfortable with, first and foremost. And I'm glad you mentioned the accountability because, I think one of the best ways to start generating that accountability is by telling people, right, that you're going to do X. Whether it's, hey, I'm going to take some time this week to sit down and write down my goals. That creates accountability. You tell that to your wife or to your kids or to your friends or your pastor, then they're probably going to follow up with you. They're probably going to ask you, "Hey, how did that go last week?" And nobody wants to be in a position where they say, "Oh, I didn't find the time to do it. I didn't actually follow through with what I said." So a lot of times, just speaking it out loud and telling people your plans will help create some of that accountability. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And obviously, you could go a lot further in creating accountability, but I think that's a good place to start. But yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because this is an exercise I actually did when I was very young. I think I was listening to Tony Robbins back then. I was probably 18, 19 years old, and he was talking about writing down your goals. Think 10 years ahead. What life do you want to live? And write down in very specific details what that looks like. And then write down where you have to be in 5 years to get there. And then what do you got to do 1 year to get there, in 1 month, and all the way to like, what do I got to do right now to start that path? And I did that, and I whether or not I followed it to a T is not as important as the fact that the exercise gets you thinking in the right way, so that way you could kind of back your way into where you want to be in the future, right? Because it's hard to get there if you don't know where there is. And I got two brothers that are 10 and 11 years younger than me who have been in and out of prison their whole life. And every time they've been in prison, especially my one brother, Brian, every time he's been locked up, and this is a kid who's 33 years old, who spent 20 years of those 33 years in and out of facilities, from youth facilities to jails to right now, he is in prison in Texas. Um, and every time he's in there, he always has these great ideas. When I get out, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And I always tell him the same thing. I'm like, Brian, write it down. The things you want to do right now, you are in jail, you have nothing but time on your hands. Write down what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, and then write down, what that looks like in 5 years, what that looks like in a year, all the way to the first day you get out. What's the first thing you need to do to set all those things in motion? And as many times as I've told him to do that, I think he's currently incarcerated. He's scheduled to be paroled in a couple of months. I think this is the first time he's actually ever listened to me and actually done it. But I've asked him to do this so many times. Now he's actually working on a book about his experiences. And he's like wanting to get out of prison because now he's like really given his heart to the Lord. He's gotten out, he wants to get out and then turn around and go right back in as a volunteer to go and talk to other men about his experience and try to help them to avoid some of the pitfalls that he's gotten into over his 20 years of being incarcerated, because 20 years is a lot. And let me just tell you, he's not committed any serious crimes. Most of that time's been like added on by violating paroles or failure to reports, things like that. Just little minor infractions. Got caught smoking when he was on, little stupid things that he wants to now go back into the prisons once he's out and help other men to avoid some of the same mistakes. But again, it's starting to finally resonate where he's actually writing these things down now, and he's got a plan for when he finally gets out.
I'm glad to. That is such a success story. How does that make you feel sharing that?
I mean, I'll be honest, it makes me feel a little anxious because, I want to make sure that this is the last time that he, is in there and he follows through. So I'm going to do, whatever I can to help him follow through this time, but also, very proud of him and very hopeful that, this will be enough, of motivation for him to actually really help him turn his life around and not go back to making those same little mistakes. Because like I said, I mean, I think his original, I mean, he is, I don't want to minimize it. I mean, he has done some things, vandalize property and things like that, where nothing that he would be the first to admit, he's not proud of the things that he's done, but he has done nothing. I mean, there are people who have committed, murders and way worse crimes who have spent a lot less time in prison but it's because once you're in the system, it's really hard to get out, and any little minor infraction could add so much more time to your sentence. And then you get to a certain point where they see you just as like a lifelong criminal, and this is habitual behavior, and then everything you do is just magnified. Where his last offense, to be honest with you, if you or I had got caught for what he was caught doing, we would have been let go, and it'd have been probably nothing, maybe a ticket. But for him, with his background and his habitual behavior, they threw the book at him. And so it's one of those things that I do think he'll have a lot of value to add to people. So I'm really optimistic and hopeful that when he gets out, he will be motivated enough, and then he's got enough of a plan that he can follow, that he'll actually be able to be successful.
Thank you for sharing that, Randall. And I hope he truly is. And I'm sending my blessings and prayers to him as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Last question for you before I let you go. I want to give you three wishes. And these are three things you can wish that people knew about this one question. So, what are three things you wish people knew about the importance of accountability and why?
Mm, that's a good question. Three things I wish people knew about the importance of accountability. Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is, um, there's not a single person among us who is not capable of the worst possible things imaginable. I mean, every person who is, part of a concentration camp started off as ordinary people, people who, were innocent children who did nothing wrong. Um, so, everything else aside, like, we are capable of the worst sins and the worst behaviors, and accountability will help keep us on the right track. So I would say that would be the first thing is, we all need accountability because we're all really capable of anything given the right circumstances. So that would be number one. Um, I guess the other thing would probably be what I kind of shared earlier about accountability. Like, to me, it starts with just like sharing what your plans are, what your hopes, your goals, your dreams are. Just vocalize it, speak it out loud. Whether it's positive things like, hey, I plan to do XYZ, or negative things like, hey, I'm really struggling with XYZ. And of course, the formats and the venues and the setting for each of those discussions might be drastically different, right? If I'm sharing areas where I'm struggling, it might be like in a men's group, or with a personal friend or a counselor, or a pastor or a priest or someone that I could really confide in. But yeah, I mean, I think the key to accomplishing goals or overcoming bad behaviors and sins that are in our life is by speaking it out loud to people and confessing. I think that's why the Bible talks about confessing to one another, is to create that accountability. So I guess number one is, know that we're all capable of really bad stuff. Accountability is crucial. Number two would be, start by just speaking out loud, being open and honest. And I guess the third thing I would say would probably just be open to feedback and to what might be criticism or hard sayings. Be vulnerable, I guess.